Hello, allow me to introduce our guest today. He is currently a business development manager at Lazada Singapore, where we met. His current role involves managing the brand and seller acquisition, seller experience, seller operations, and seller incubation projects for Last Mall Singapore. Last Mall is the premier channel on Lazada, exclusively for brands and authorized distributors. Before this, he was the marketing and partnerships manager at SinFooTech, a food technology startup whose breakthrough technology involves the development of a patented fermentation technology to convert a byproduct of tofu manufacture into a first of its kind soil alcoholic beverage. And going further before this, he was an associate customer support specialist at Hubspot, a currently US listed software company for inbound marketing, sales, and customer service software products. His first job out of university was at Changi Airport Group, being a senior associate at Airport Operations Management. He was part of the team which successfully operationalized Changi Airport's newest passenger terminal, Terminal 4, which is also my favorite airport terminal in the world.
Very kind words, thanks.
He also has a side hustle in the form of producing and putting up unboxing videos on his very own YouTube channel. Thank you for making time and welcome to the show, Aaron Wong.
Thank you very much for having me here, John. It's a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to the next half an hour, next hour or so to have a chat.
Yeah. So Aaron, I just want to let the audience know a bit more about you. So maybe you can give us an introduction about what you currently do and which company you're at. Tell us a bit more about what your role is.
Yeah, so where
Please.
I am currently at this point in time, I'm a business development manager with Lazada Singapore. So I am from the team that specifically focuses on established brands. So we're talking about the likes of your big brands like P&G, Dyson, and the like. So within the Lazada ecosystem, we have something that's called Last Mall, which is basically the sales channel that's meant for official brand owners, established brands, of course, as well as their official distributors and resellers. So a large part of my scope really revolves around the new seller acquisition side of things. So of course, finding ways and means to make sure that as a platform, Lazada Singapore, we have as wide as possible, a branded assortment for the customers who come to the Lazada platform to shop, right? So it could involve things like, hunting for brands to get them to come onto Last Mall, of course, to set up their shop and sell to, the users of the Lazada ecosystem, all the way to things like, seller onboarding experience, right? The entire journey in which a typical seller goes through to get their store set up, to register, to submit the documents, right to even the point of setting up their store, right? What are the key touch points that sellers have to go through in order to get up and running so that, they'll be able to make their first sale. And of course, hopefully, many more sales to come, throughout their journey with Lazada. So I think that is very much what I currently do at Lazada Singapore in a nutshell. I think it's a very interesting role because on one hand also, initially when I first started, there was a lot of pitching and hunting, right? So you do speak to a lot of sellers. And I think I've been blessed with the opportunity to speak with sellers from across the board, across very different categories, large sellers, SMEs, you name it, I probably would have spoken to such sellers before. And it's always very interesting to see the different perspectives that they bring to the table, right, when it comes to setting up e-commerce operations on an e-commerce platform. And I think even more so given the COVID-19 situation, the whole push to be on e-commerce is very much stronger than it used to be before. And I think speaking to such a diverse group of people is very eye-opening and I would say very enriching at the same time as well. This is pretty much what I do here at Lazada Singapore.
And what do you do for fun that doesn't involve work? For example, like what you do last weekend?
Well, I'm quite interested in music, so I do play the guitar and I play the drums as well. But fun fact, I didn't actually start for my drumming experiences, right? So I played the drums. I only picked it up sometime last year, towards the end of phase one, right? So in Singapore, just for some context, we had a circuit breaker, and a lot of us couldn't go about our normal lives as per normal. So after that, it got to me thinking I've always been interested to learn the drums. Now is a better time than any to actually do something about it. So I did. So I enrolled myself in courses and I learned drums and here I am. So I think, I quite like music. I'm also a big fan of global affairs, so I read quite a fair bit. I like to keep abreast of the happenings around the world, right? Because I think at the end of the day, there's so many topics that interest me. And I think apart from that also, I'm quite a big fan of technology, specifically, computer hardware, software, and that kind of thing. So I build PCs for fun. I enjoy reading up about the latest and greatest technologies in the computing world and so on. What I did last week, well, I mean, given the situation that we have in Singapore, right? Like a lot of us are all vying to go out to dine out for the first time because, there's a regulation that you have to be fully vaccinated. So I got my fully vaccinated status about 2 weeks ago. And of course, I've been catching up with my friends. So a lot of that was spent on socializing, which is something that, is something that we should really treasure, especially given the current situation that we have.
Yeah, it's a luxury. So maybe you can provide us some context with like your growing up years, like your schools. So maybe briefly, like you can tell us like a glimpse of your maybe junior college and your university years.
Yeah, so I think I've led quite a typical Singaporean educational journey, right? So typical local secondary school, and then after that I went on to a junior college. I was from Victoria Junior College, where I studied sciences. And then thereafter, I went on to university. I studied at Singapore Management University, where I graduated with a bachelor's degree in business management, with a major
Summa cum laude, right?
It's just 3 words on a piece of paper, but yeah. So I mean, I majored in corporate communication, and I did do a exchange program as well in Lund, Sweden. And it was fun. I think for myself, that was probably the first time ever that I've lived overseas for an extended period of time. And it's always cool to immerse yourself in a very different culture, right? Because I think at the end of the day, Singapore, if not, you just stay in a single country for the rest of your life, Singaporean way of living. It's always good to go out there, expose yourself to different lifestyles and different ways of thinking, and broaden your horizons. So that's that. Singapore Management University, that's basically where I graduated from. Did I answer your questions?
Yeah. You also said that summa cum laude are just 3 words on a piece of paper. So you're probably going to be offending a lot of people who are working so hard to get those 3 words on a piece of paper. Maybe just for audience, for the context, maybe you can explain like what does summa cum laude mean, and I think it's Latin, yeah, the word?
Yeah, I mean, it just means highest distinction. So it's just the equivalent of, I suppose, first-class honors in certain countries, right? Because it's either you use the American system or the British system to grade your university degree. But of course, don't take it wrong. At the end of the day, I think one thing that I realized from my 5.5 years of working is that once you get out there, that piece of paper can only probably get you through the door of your first career. And whatever you then do for the rest of the career is pretty much dependent on your own capabilities, right? Because let's face it, being good in academics doesn't necessarily translate to being good in real life, right? It's one thing to be good at, the theoretical aspects of whatever you studied, and another thing to put it all into practice. And it's a very different world, so to speak. I will also say that, studying is a bit, to a certain extent, single-dimensional. But at the end of the day, when you go out to work, there's a lot of other factors in play. How you interact with people, whether or not you hit it off well with your direct line manager, your work ethic, right? All these are clearly not reflective of anything if you say do very well in school. But at the end of the day, if your personality is one that people do not enjoy working with, then possibly you won't go very far. But I think at the end of the day, credit's due where it's due, right? I think given the current situation, at least in Singapore, people do place a certain value to a degree, right? And I think, of course, if you do enjoy the topics that you're studying in school, it will go very far for you. So for myself, I am quite keen in the world of communications and marketing, and that's what I majored in. And I think, thankfully, I was interested in the topics that I studied in school, and that allowed me to do slightly better than the rest of my peers. So if anything, I think the key message here is that, it's just a piece of paper, but at the end of the day, it also works to the other opposite spectrum, right? You can be someone who just graduated from university, you may not have gotten a first-class honors degree, but if you have the right attitude in life, I'm pretty sure you're going to succeed. Heck, look at the people around you, people like Bill Gates and there's so many other successful entrepreneurs out there who don't have a proper degree or didn't do well in school, and yet they're wildly successful in their careers, they have great finances and all that. So academics is just one thing. Your academic results is really just one small little thing that just defines you for a short period of your life, but then, there's so much more runway that you have in your life to actually, prove yourself and of course work towards your goals and objectives.
So you said you always have an interest in communications, and I think that's what you studied in school, and I think that helped you to get your honors in your degree. And then what made you join Changi Airport Group to do operations management?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think at that point in time, it was 2014, and as part of the curriculum for Singapore Management University, right, everybody had to do a compulsory internship. So it just so happened that I managed to score an internship with the Changi Airport Group, so I went through with it. And at the end of the internship, I was offered a midterm scholarship, which I took up. And I think at that point in time in 2014, like you're a sophomore in university. I hadn't quite decided yet what I want to do exactly for my career. So when an opportunity like that comes around knocking, you don't simply turn it down, right? And I think the fact of the matter is that the midterm scholarship only had a 1-year bond. So it's definitely much more flexible as compared to, say, a full-term scholarship where, people are bonded for like 6 years, 5.5 years, that kind of thing. So I think, if anything, it's more of like, it's very convenient, it's very good timing, right? Like, you're not quite sure what you wanted to do at that point in time. No doubt I had an interest in corporate communications, but, when offer comes knocking from Changi Airport Group, the best airport in the world, and of course, it's a very nice place to work. I mean, I had a great time there as well as an intern. So I think, and it's money that's right there, right? You take it up, it helps you defray some of your costs of your education, your university education. So I think it's a good deal to take. I mean, because all things considered, I think my thinking back then was that even if it doesn't pan out, it's fine. It's just one day of your life. You're like 24, 25 years old. There's still a lot of room for you to explore and do different things. And, if need be, correct your career trajectory. So I think that's pretty much the thinking that I had back in 2014. And how did I end up in the role as part of the Terminal 4 developmental team, right? I think quite simply, the core business of Changi Airport Group is really about airport operations, right? Because, I mean, it makes sense. If you're an airport operator, the core business is airport operations. So I think at that point in time, it just so happened that Terminal 4 was the up-and-coming big project, and they had an opening, right? And I think it just sort of like fell into place naturally that they were looking for someone a little bit more entry level to actually come into the team and actually lead some projects. So I thought, that's probably going to be the best way to, go through a trial by fire, really get your hands dirty on something that eventually, if everything falls into place nicely, right? You will see the tangible outcome of the efforts that you and your team put together, and that is Terminal 4, as what we see today. It was a very good experience. I mean, of course, in my shoes back then in 2016, when I first started my job as a full-time employee, right, I probably wouldn't have said the same because it was, honestly speaking, probably one of the steepest challenges that I ever had to go through in terms of a learning curve. Because, again, I majored in communications. I think for that 2 years of my life, I spent a lot of my time managing projects as a project manager from an operations perspective. And I also, because obviously Terminal 4 is a development project, right? So I had spent quite a fair bit of my time managing things that were related to electrical engineering, civil engineering, basically stuff that I was never ever trained for. So as a fresh grad, very, very daunting. But I count myself very thankful to be in the presence of colleagues who are very experienced in that regard. They have spent many years in the airport industry. So of course, it's all a matter of hunkering down and really making sure that you have an open mindset. Because, I mean, let's face it, you don't have the relevant experience, right? So all that really matters then is that willingness to learn from the people around you, the experts, and of course, trying to develop yourself along the way. I mean, Terminal 4 was open with much fanfare and successfully as well. I mean, barring the current COVID-19 situation, I think it's probably one of the proudest moments of my career thus far to be part of a national project that helps to put Singapore on the world stage. And yeah, it's just something that, every time you go past the Changi Airport area, you know that, okay, at least I had a small part in contributing to the success of the airport.
You said that it was one of the steepest challenges that you've had in your career, and you were so new and green in your career. Yeah. And you did your communications in school, you get a first class honors, and then you chose to be in this big project, yes, but were there not communication roles in this project? Was operations the only thing you had to get involved with?
I would say it's predominantly 95% operations and project management. I think at that point in time, there wasn't really much scope for communications or marketing. I mean, obviously, when a little bit closer to the phase where we were about to launch the terminal, right, then of course, we would involve our corporate marketing and communications teams to come in. It's quite clear, like our team's mandate is really from a development perspective, making sure that the airport terminal is ready for operations, and when it's up and running, to make sure that it runs without a hitch. Yeah, I didn't have that much opportunity to actually tap on whatever I had learned in school. And that's why I say it was a very, very steep learning curve. But again, couldn't have been possible without the support of my direct line managers and of course the team around me, because a lot of these people have been working at the airport for many years, managing terminals 1 to 3, and obviously they had the relevant experience and the credentials to actually push this through. And of course I had to learn quite a lot, get my hands dirty, and really go down on the side and really just toughen yourself up and make things work one way or another.
1 year was the bond of the scholarship that you took, but you end up staying for 2.5 years.
2 years. Actually, slightly over 2 years. I think about 2 years, 2 months-ish.
Okay.
Yeah, so I could have easily just upped and left, right? I joined in February 2016. I left Changi Airport Group in March 2018, which is a good, about 2 years and 1 month, thereabouts. So, at that point in time, I think by my first year mark, when I already had completed my bond, I was of course thinking, right, it's probably not what I want to do as a career, because I was already thinking of myself if I were in marketing communications, how different life would have been. But again, I stayed on for that full year because I'm very thankful to be blessed with a team that, we get our jobs done. They're great people that I enjoyed myself hanging around with and learning from them. And I think that really was a large part of the decision why I decided to stay on all the way till the project was completed, to see our efforts come to fruition. And then that was where I told myself, okay, the project's been launched already, I can leave. Of course, with a heavy heart, right? Because we put in a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into developing the terminal as it is. But I think it's something that, a commitment to myself. I wanted to see the project through because I've already invested so much time into it. It would be a waste to just leave just like that. No doubt, the subject matter was not exactly aligned with my interests, but I still had great fun. I think if anything, it's probably shaped the way I think and do things today. 3 years down the road, I think it's all about getting the exposure to very different things that shapes your thinking and gives you that breadth of perspective, right? Rather than you've been doing a certain thing your entire life and you don't know how life on the other side, in the operations world, for instance, in the construction world, for instance, is like. So I think it's all about that diversity of experiences that has shaped my career to be what it is today. And I am quite thankful for that.
Speaking of diversity, from Changi Airport Group, you move on to Hubspot. Tell us about your time there. Hubspot, what did you do and how was your time there?
Yeah, so Hubspot, in a nutshell, like you rightfully summarized earlier on, they're an American software as a service solutions provider. They specialize mainly in CRM software, so the likes of marketing, sales, and service solutions. It's a cloud-based platform. So if I were to use an example to liken them to another company, you can think of them as sort of like Salesforce. Right, so it's a software company. It's very much more B2B, and of course they do focus on smaller enterprises who are looking to have a suite of marketing, sales, and service solutions to actually power their business. So how I made that transition from Changi Airport Group to Hubspot, I think, like I said, I studied communications in university, and I found that it's something that I've always been interested to do. And the reason why I took a liking to Hubspot is quite simply because of the culture there. So I must caveat that I was only there for about 3 months or so, but I'll get to that story eventually, right, as to how come it's such a short stint. But during the 3 months that I was there, it was a great experience as well, because I think it is a company that truly walks the culture. It's a very inclusive culture there. Everybody is always on the lookout for each other, and it's a very transparent culture as well. So I think the reason for me joining the company as an associate customer support specialist as a role, to give some context, is basically like a frontline support role, where customers of Hubspot software would reach out to you in the event that they had any issues or problems with their software, right? So a day in the typical life of a customer support specialist, right, could be, you come into work at about 8 a.m., right? You'll be talking to customers from the United States, from North America, right? Because that is probably about evening time for the folks in the States. So you could be talking about things of how am I supposed to set up my CRM to integrate it with, say, Shopify, for instance. So it can be things like walking them through our platform, walking them through the APIs that HubSpot currently has, so that they're able to successfully create a tightly knit ecosystem with whatever software they're already currently using, together with HubSpot. And as the day goes along, you'll be talking to people from Asia, from India, from Singapore, about all sorts of things. It can be things like, okay, I'm creating a sales funnel, and I want to be able to see the ROI, or rather the performance maybe, of some of my sales reps. How do I go about setting up this process flow in the HubSpot CRM? So you can walk through that with the customer that phones in. And then comes evening time. That's where Europe comes online, right? So you may very well be speaking to folks from the United Kingdom, France, Germany, wherever else there is in Europe, to actually handle the questions that they may have using the Hubspot platform. So I think it's also, okay, it was very interesting for me. I would say that for someone who didn't have much of a technical background, it might be quite a challenge because you do need to know your stuff, right? Like you probably need to have skills like in front-end web development, HTML, CSS, maybe to a certain extent JavaScript, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to troubleshoot some of these questions that the customers may phone in and ask about. But I think so for myself,
how do you get the role if you don't know all these things?
Well, I think it's a real. So the exciting thing and interesting thing about this company is that they're willing to invest in your training, right? So at the end of the day, I think the principle that they have is really more of like seeing the skills and of course the personality that one brings to the table. Because I mean, let's face it, we all have to start from somewhere, right? For whatever we do. It's always a question of who is willing to take the chance on you for you to be able to get your hands dirty, to learn on the get-go, and develop your skills in that regard. Right? I mean, let's face it, we all had to start from zero at some point in our lives. And I think that's probably the mantra that HubSpot had, right? When they're hiring people into this role. They want to see your aptitude and, of course, your character, because let's face it, not everybody knows HTML and CSS or any of the other technical jargons for that matter, right? So it's really more of like a culture fit to see whether or not you're willing and able to learn. And if you are, great, we will provide to you the resources and, of course, the training to make sure that you know what you're doing and you're able to succeed in your role.
You told me there wasn't any official leave
in
the company.
Yes. So the interesting thing about HubSpot is that they have unlimited leave, which is quite unheard of.
Yeah.
And interestingly, at least from what I saw during my time there, people do actually take it. And it's interesting because like it's a very American culture, right? I think for us here in Southeast Asia, the very notion of like empowering your employees to manage their time effectively and you don't have to micromanage them, it might be something that's a little bit foreign, right? In certain
It is.
It is, right? So you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So it's a breath of fresh air, I must say. Unlimited leave, your managers empower you to manage your time. As long as you deliver your KPIs, they're cool. So it's pretty cool. It's pretty interesting.
Wow. Yeah. And I hear of companies here in Singapore last year who enforce their employees to switch on their Zoom just so that their managers know that they're online and they're working. Yeah.
I can imagine.
And this was 2020, and this is, I think, locally listed company, by the way. So yeah, I think the cultures are different. And you stayed here at HubSpot for 3 months.
Yeah, indeed. So the backstory to this is that I was offered an opportunity to join a early stage startup by a good friend of mine at university. So what happened is that, we met up for a meal one day, and he was like, I have a business proposition for you, hear me out. And by the end of that session, I was sold, so much so that I decided that it's an opportunity that would be too good to pass up. No doubt that I had only joined HubSpot for about 3 months. But I think there were a lot of considerations at play, right? At the end of the day, I mean, the proposition on the table was strong enough for me to want it so bad that, you know what, I'm going to really go all in with you. And let's try to see if this actually turns out to be something great. So I think...
walk us through, right? I know a bit about this story through you. But walk us through, like, what was this story? What was this idea? How did he sell it to you? Paint us that scene.
Yeah.
Right? Walk us through that scene. Put us right there in front of you and your friend when you had this discussion.
Sure. So it was, if I'm not mistaken, it was dinner, right? So like he already had a bottle of the beverage product that they were working on. So, we had a conversation and he told me that, he and his friend, who is also the other co-founder of the company, they're working on a new type of alcoholic beverage product that is produced from tofu waste, right? So there's a very environmental slant to that. It's very interesting. I think back in 2018, the government was actually starting to make a very big push towards environmentally friendly businesses, be it in terms of waste reduction, food waste management, and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of news articles on government agencies such as Enterprise Singapore putting in a lot of grants and additional support to help businesses in these fields succeed. So I think, he had a sample of the product that they were producing. I tasted it and I was blown away. So it's actually brewed from this substance called tofu whey or soy whey, whey being W-H-E-Y, right? So for the uninformed, tofu whey or soy whey is actually that liquid that you see inside the plastic packaging when you go to any typical supermarket and you purchase tofu. you'll see that your block of tofu is always floating in like some clear liquid. So that liquid is actually soy whey. You know, whenever tofu manufacturers produce tofu, they produce thousands of liters of that on a daily basis. And because it has no commercial value, what tofu manufacturers simply do is that they dispose of it. So the unfortunate thing about soy whey is that it has no commercial value simply due to the fact that it doesn't taste good and it doesn't smell good, right? So no one has actually looked into repurposing that into a food grade substance, so to speak. And what actually happened here is that my friend's co-founder, he's a PhD student in food sciences from NUS at that point in time. That was actually his research project for PhD, right? So he actually looked into finding ways to actually process soy whey to turn it into a viable food ingredient. So he realized that fermentation could actually significantly change the properties of this liquid such that it literally goes from zero to hero, right? So from a substance that smells bad, doesn't taste good, you've turned it into an alcoholic beverage that actually tastes somewhat like a cross between a Moscato and a sake. And I was blown away. I think at the end of the day, one thing about startups is that a lot of times they are simply ideas written down using pen on paper, right? You don't actually have a MVP that you're able to produce to people. A lot of them are ideas. So I think for myself, at that point in time, it was quite clear. They already had a minimum viable product that was right here. It's something that's drinkable. I mean, it is right in front of your eyes, right? And it got me thinking, okay, they are actually onto something, because what you're literally doing is taking a waste product, adding so much value to it such that, you know, potentially it will become something that's valuable. And let's face it, alcoholic beverages have good premiums, right? You're willing to splash out $15, $20, $30, or even more for a nice bottle of like wine, whiskey, so on and so forth. And here we are with a product that, you know, is produced from something that we probably didn't have to pay much. In fact, we didn't have to pay for it at the point in time because it's, you know, we're working with tofu factories to offload their soy whey, right? So we're getting the stuff for free at that point in time. And here we are with the potential to create fat margins for ourselves by turning a waste product into something with a lot of value. So that was something that got me thinking, you know what, this might actually be something that would really work and work in a big way. And yeah, that was pretty much how it got me thinking that this is an opportunity that I wouldn't want to pass up. And I think given the story that's behind it as well, it's made from a waste byproduct that would have otherwise gone down the drain, potentially cause environmental pollution of waterways and that kind of thing. There's a lot of things that you can work with, the story, the narrative that you can create, and it's all for the greater good. So I think that was enough for me to be convinced that I wanted to be a part of the team and wanted to be a part of the journey, because there's so many interesting things you can do with it. We had basically another opportunity to create Singapore's very own alcoholic beverage, right? So like Japan has sake as its national beverage. Korea has soju. What does Singapore have? Sure, I mean, we have tiger beer, but a beer is not exactly a Singaporean invention, right? Here we are taking soy whey to create a totally new category of beverage product. I felt that there were so many interesting things that we could do, and that was what really was the catch for me. I think, like, you know, this is something that I wanted to be a part of. And at that point in time, I was like 26, 27, I think, thereabouts. I figured that, you know, if this didn't work out, it's fine. I mean, at the end of the day, the experiences that I'll gain through joining a startup and trying to build something from scratch would be very valuable and go a long way in my career. And looking back, I don't regret it at all. If anything, it's been a great experience.
I want to clarify, right? So you say this soy whey, it's a byproduct when the tofu factory manufacture the tofu.
Yeah, that is right.
And usually, what is their typical way of disposing this soy whey?
Well, if you were to go by the books, you're supposed to engage, like, you know, a water treatment. A company is able to basically handle waste effluent, right?
Sure.
So you probably pay them, they'll come by, collect it from you, and then they'll treat it before disposing it into the waterways.
When you say treat it because the soy whey is dangerous, it's harmful?
Okay, so it's more of the fact that it contains nutrients that potentially could cause pollution to waterways. So, for example, it's very rich in like amino acids and other components that eventually, if you were to release it into waterways, it could cause things like algae blooms, which eventually would affect the ecosystem of the waterways that they're disposed in. So not just in Singapore. I think this example that I just highlighted will probably be more applicable to places like China, for instance, where maybe their management of waste effluent is not as strong as Singapore. I mean, given such a big country, right? So they may just simply dispose it into a stream, and then it might be a stream that, fishermen might actually use to fish for their livelihood. And if it causes like massive pollution, it kills all the fish that's in the water, then you have a problem on your hands.
Yeah.
So I think, that's pretty much the story behind Soyway.
Yeah, there's so many things I want to ask from what you just said. How did you guys convince the tofu factories? Did you have to pay them to that waste, or were they just happy to be able to dispose them without doing anything?
Yeah, so I think at that point in time, it was a very newfangled concept, right? No one had actually done research into the disposal of Soyway. So at that point in time, when we went knocking on the doors of tofu factories, a lot of them were, I would say they were rather bemused, like, oh, okay, here's a breath of fresh air. We've never actually seen someone who's trying to deal with the issue of Soyway disposal. So a lot of times, the partners that we wound up working with, they were more than happy to pass it to us for free. I think also given the fact that, it's like, it's three young chaps, just trying to offload some waste byproduct from your factory. I think a lot of them were more than happy to give it to us for free. And we were then able to do our research to actually try to see whether it was commercially viable using different types of Soyway from different factories. So the answer to your question is we managed to get it for free at that point in time. And I think it's also because it's something interesting. This is basically a classic example of we have a solution to an existing problem. And it just so happens that no one has actually looked into this problem before. And the fact of the matter is, the only other way to dispose of it properly by legal means is to pay someone else to do it. And yet here we are offering to take it off their hands for free. Right? I guess ultimately if, at that point in time, if we had successfully commercialized it within that 1 year that I was in the company, of course, the optics would be different. I'm pretty sure the tofu factories would now want to come to the table and start negotiating a certain rate. Because as any business owner, if I see a potential income opportunity, I would definitely take it. But at that point in time, very young startup, it was quite clear what we're trying to do is that we wanted to make sure that whatever we're trying to do and trying to create was actually viable in the long run and in a large scale, which is obviously what we're trying to do. So yeah, got it for free.
I'll bring us back to that conversation, the first conversation you had with a friend.
Yeah.
I get it. Like there was an MVP, which is in form of the bottle of that alcoholic beverage, and you tasted it and it was wonderful. So that was real, that was credible, right? So it was not something written on paper that you couldn't smell or drink or eat. How else did he try to convince you? And what was the offer? Because you said that he told you that it's going to be a business proposition. Did he offer you a role? Did he open up the opportunity with you in the first conversation? How did the opportunity come about? Right.
So I think the details are kind of hazy at this point in time because it's been about 3 years or so. But I think it was quite clear. He was looking for someone to basically join him for the business and, help scale things up. And I'm pretty sure you worked in a startup before, early stage startups at that point in time was simply just himself, a co-founder, and that's it. It's two people. So there were a lot of things that needed looking at. And the title that I was given was Marketing and Partnerships Manager. But in reality, of course, I did so much more. And with no regrets, because I think that is really part and parcel of a startup, right? You need to know the ins and outs of every single thing so that eventually, when it gets to the point where you're able to scale up eventually, then you can start to specialize in whatever that you were supposed to do, which in my case would have been more of like marketing and partnerships to actually get the product up and running and ready for sale. So yeah, I think the offer on the table is like, here's an opportunity for you. The canvas is blank, so to speak. But of course, he and we have worked together on several projects in SMU. So we more or less knew how each other worked. And I guess there was a certain amount of trust as well in each other, that each of us knew what we're talking about. And it was really just a matter of taking the plunge. Like I trusted him for whatever he just shared to me, and he had trust in me as well, in that I would be able to deliver and help him out whenever it was necessary. So I think when I joined the company, of course, my key focus was still marketing and partnerships, but I also wound up doing a lot of other interesting things as well, like, being a part of the process where we had to find a more time-efficient way, for instance, to collect Soyway from factories. So just to give some example, at that point in time when we were working with certain tofu factories, they didn't have a established means of actually collecting the Soyway as it's being produced from the manufacture of tofu. So I think for us, we had to do backbreaking things like buy aluminium trays and place it right beneath the machine, right? So that we're able to collect as much Soyway as possible. But if you think about it, if you want to go big, you want to be able to produce thousands of liters of alcoholic beverage per day, collecting via aluminium trays simply isn't going to cut it. So putting our heads together and trying to experiment, trying to find ways to design devices, right, that could actually help us in collecting the soy weight, for instance. I had a hand in that. It was very interesting. It challenged all of us immensely because we're not like engineers by training, right? But at the end of the day, it's really more of like trying to put together what we needed, approaching the respective experts, reaching out to industry experts so that we can try to see what's the best way to solve this situation. So that's one example of what I did. Although, it's marketing partnerships, right? But at the end of the day, it's such a small team. I think when I was in the company, we had 4 full-time employees and a handful of other interns as well. So I think having all the different people, huddled together, putting together the different perspectives for areas that we didn't have the expertise in, it really helped. And I think also having a support network, right? Like having mentors from industry who will be able to point you in the right direction, super important because not everyone is an expert in everything that they do. And that's where you need to defer to the expertise of people who are indeed experts in their respective fields.
So essentially, it sounds to me like you were the first employee.
First, second, yeah, thereabouts.
Right.
When I joined the company, another lady joined the company as well. So she was more from the R&D side of things. So she was helping our chief technology officer with the research side of things, perfecting the fermentation techniques and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I just want to take a pause here and ask about like the context, right, of you and your peers at that point in time when you were being propositioned this opportunity to join a really early stage startup. Like what were your peers doing? And back then, you was 3 years of experience?
Yeah, I would say when I first joined SinFooTech, it was 2.5 years of experience, I guess.
Okay.
2.5 years of working full time.
What were your peers up to at this point in time?
I would say a lot of them were just leading living out typical careers at the point in time as someone who had like 2 years of work experience, right? So
what was a typical career, man?
I don't know, it could be things like working at Big Four if you majored in accounting. If not, you'll be working in a bank, doing investment banking, doing management consulting. And this is actually an interesting point. When I first joined CAG full-time, one thing that I noticed is that there were very, very few SMU graduates in CAG. A large part of them were probably from other local universities, SIM, NUS, NTU, but not so much SMU. And I guess probably it's the way that SMU has branded itself such that it's producing a lot more graduates that tend to end up in the banking sector, in the management consulting sector, and so on. So I think to answer your question, at least for my peers at that point in time, a lot of them were pretty much going down that SIT route. So accountants in training, management management consultants in training, and so on and so forth. I don't think I knew any other, apart from my friend, obviously, the co-founder, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was actually doing a startup at that point in time. So I would say it's a rather different career trajectory that I opted to be on as compared to my other peers.
And you had the first class honors in communications from SMU, and then you did something quite different in CAG, and now you were on the verge of joining this very early stage startup. What was going through your head? Like, do you take any advice? Do you go to any of your friends, colleagues or ex-colleagues, family, on what you should do next, whether you should join? And also tell us a bit about the offer, right? What was on the table for you? Like, do you have to take a pay cut? I know it's a lot of questions in once, but walk us through. Like, what were your decision process like?
Sure. So I think for some context, obviously you've only been working for like 2 years, right? All your peers are pretty much going on the tried and tested routes of being bankers and et cetera, et cetera. And here you are intending to join a early stage startup that had no guarantee of stability. I think the thought process was quite simple. I think at the end of the day, my conviction was that it's a product and notion that I strongly believed in, right? I really like the whole fact that they're turning waste into something of value. That's number one. And I think also, at the end of the day, it's probably also a little bit about my own upbringing, right? So I come from a family where, my dad and mom, they are entrepreneurs to a certain extent. My dad, he's a sole proprietor, so he runs his own business. My mom also, she works at my grandfather's company, so it's pretty much like a family business. So I guess throughout my life, right, I've always been exposed to entrepreneurship in one way or another. So I think support from my family was definitely there for sure, because they are right in the thick of things, of being entrepreneurs, of running their own business. So the support is definitely there. In terms of reaching out to friends and other, even ex-colleagues, right? I think definitely for sure, as a 27-year-old, 28-year-old at that point in time, of course, you don't have that many life experiences. You would want to reach out to people who have a little bit more experience than you, right? Just to see and hear from different perspectives. And I think the key takeaway that I got is that, it's always a good thing because it gives you the pros and cons of whatever you're trying to do, and it allows you to make a more informed decision, so to speak. So definitely I did. I reached out to family, I reached out to friends. I think at the end of the day, I concluded that given my situation at that point in time, I didn't have a mortgage to pay for, I don't have kids to pay for, I don't have much to lose, in fact. I mean, at the end of the day, I already made that conscious decision to pivot away from the aviation industry. And now here's the opportunity, a blank canvas for you to start afresh and do so many different things. And I guess that's probably what powered me through to actually take up the offer. Now, to address your question about the offer, there was a pay cut, naturally, because it's not a big company, right? It's a startup, for crying out loud. I think it wasn't a very big pay cut nonetheless, but I think at that point in time, like I said, what really helped is that I didn't have any financial burdens, right? I mean, my university education was already paid for because I had a scholarship and that sort of thing. And yeah, it basically was the perfect circumstance for you to take a big risk. And of course, if it turns out well, great. If it doesn't turn out all that well, that's fine. You've probably you probably have gained quite a fair bit of experience that eventually will go a long way in your life anyway. So for me, I saw it as very much a win-win situation. And I was more than happy to plunge headfirst into joining the startup. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. How was it like working with your friend? I mean, you said he's a good friend. How has this journey affected the friendship, if it's been affected?
Right. I would say it's great. I mean, we've weathered through the past few years. In fact, we still catch up very often. I think every other month or so. Obviously, when I broke the news to him that I thought that it was time to leave. As a friend, naturally, there will be a certain amount of sadness involved for sure, right? Because you were hoping that you stay throughout. But I think also there's also more practical perspectives that you need to look at. Okay, so I think probably I need to set the context here. So I left after 1 year of being in the startup. And it was quite simply because at that point in time, I had given myself a runway of 1 year. I wanted to see that, whatever I did, I wanted to be able to know that we are on the right track and we were in a position to launch a product as soon as possible. Because let's face it, resources are finite, right? A company can't possibly go on burning money for too long a period of time. So I think at that point in time, the push, I mean, the tipping point was really the fact that we had ideas of how the product was going to be launched already. Marketing materials were up, a bottle design was up. But at the point in time when I was about to leave, we had many issues in terms of product quality and consistency. But I mean, the whole point about a beverage product is that it should taste the same whenever you produce it. Yep. And I think the thing about it being a novel product made from soy whey, no one's actually ever done research into it before, to actually use it as a food ingredient. That was something that stumbled us. We were not able to actually ensure that the product was consistent for every single batch that we produced. And I think for myself, the tipping point was that when I realized that, we had so many people that were just waiting to buy our product, but we had nothing to show for it. So at that point in time, I told my friend that I really felt that this was probably not the time to focus on the business side of things. We've already done a lot of great work, right? We've already built up the leads pool for potential places and people and institutions and companies that we want to sell the product to, but we simply didn't have a product to sell. So the conversation that I had with my friend was that this is probably something that we should revisit in the future once the R&D side of things has been settled, right? You are confident that your product is food safe, you're able to produce something that tastes exactly the same every single time you produce it, and then let's talk again. And I think at that point in time also there's also a certain emotional attachment in that I know that me staying on is of course another financial burden to the company, right? Like the longer you stay, of course, you're paying me to do marketing, sales and partnerships. But if I'm not able to deliver in that regard because our product is not ready, then the calculus at that point in time I felt wasn't right. So I think he definitely understood from where I was coming. Also, we do need to rationalize our overheads, right? So I think, it was a decision that, although it was sad for us to see each other part in terms of a professional way, right? But of course, we still maintain our relationship because I still believe in the product, even to today. And he's still working on it, in fact. So I think it just so happens that, us as friends, we were able to weather through this so-called breakup in a very good way. I can't say that it's going to be the same for every single person out there because there is that saying, right? When it comes to money, sometimes it does ruin friendships. I'm very thankful that it didn't in my situation. So I think probably one takeaway here is that it's always double-edged sword. On one hand, I spoke earlier on about joining a startup and you know this person very well, you know how he ticks and all that. But that in itself could also prove to be a stumbling block, right? Especially when things go south.
Yep.
And on the other hand, if you are joining a startup where you don't know the co-founders on a personal level, then fine, there's no emotional baggage. So not one size fits all. I think I'm very thankful that the way things have panned out is that, things somehow came together eventually, right? I left the company on good terms. I'm still very good friends with my friend. We catch up from time to time. So every person's experience is different. But I think the key lesson here that I'd like to highlight is that, at the end of the day, you go into a situation, there's always going to be things that are gained and lost. So you do need to be mentally prepared for that eventuality. I mean, of course, when I joined the company, it's inevitable that at the back of your mind, you'll be thinking, okay, what happens if this really goes south, right? Am I willing to, risk the relationship that I have with my friend? Am I going to have any regrets in terms of the potential opportunity cost that I could have had if I were to have stayed on the Hubspot, for instance, gotten career progression and this sort of thing. So I think easier said than done, but it's really all about putting down all the respective things that are on the table that you might be putting up, you might be staking and foregoing when you join a startup, and making sure that you are able to live with all of these eventual consequences if the push comes to shove. If things really don't go well, these are things that you must be comfortable to live with moving forward.
And you move on from SinFooTech to Lazada.
Yep, I did.
Right. And I'm curious about this job search process. How many jobs do you apply for? How many got back to you? How many jobs you went for an interview with? I asked this because I gone through a similar experience whereby you were in a startup or you were in kind of a entrepreneurial pursuit, and then when it's time for start looking for a job, you could be rusty first of all, right? In job search, you don't know how all this works. Suddenly there's so many layers, so many people you have talked to, so many rounds. Yep. Suddenly you have to go into this interview preparation mode. Walk us through the process that you gone through when you were deciding to leave SinFooTech and you were searching for something else.
Right. So I think it might be apt for me to start a little bit more from the perspective of my skill set. So I think, again, looking back, I truly enjoyed my experience in the startup. Reason being is because it allowed me to do so many different things, which obviously in the context of any established organization, you will not be able to do, right? Because you come into any established organization, here's your portfolio, you're in a sense siloed. You'll be doing these things. But of course, on the other hand, being in a startup, you have a lot more free reign to dabble in very different things to help out in other scopes that are not originally your main job scope, right? So I think it gave me that benefit of perspective in that I knew what are some things that I enjoyed doing, what are some things that I'm slightly better at doing, so that I would be able to narrow down, in terms of what I'm going to be doing for my next job, what are some areas that I feel that I could excel in. So just to recap, I'm currently a business development manager with Lazada, right? I think for myself, what I started then looking for was really for a job that allowed me to do a lot more sales and BD and partnership. Because I think from my 1 year's worth of experience at SinFooTech, I truly did enjoy the thrill of the chase, right? Pushing a certain pitch to people who might be cold leads and then winning them over gradually. And I thought that was something that I could do and enjoyed doing. And that's the reason why I started looking for something related to partnerships and BD, which, I mean, if you think about it, that was the original job scope that I was hired for, right? In SinFooTech, marketing and partnerships. So actually, in fact, Lazada was the first place that I applied to, and they got back to me the next day. And that was the only job that I applied for. And I think it just so happened that I applied for Lazada because I think back in 2019, e-commerce was up and coming. I was using the platform myself quite a fair bit. But it got me thinking that, this might be the future. And for myself, like I said, I'm quite a techie, right? I think e-commerce at that point in time, the market share was not very high. In fact, for the life of me, I can't remember what's the market share at that point in time. But it was growing, for sure. Maybe not in a very big way, but it is one of the things that I personally felt will be a game changer in the future. And true enough, right? I mean, obviously, I couldn't have predicted that COVID was going to happen. But in 2019, it was what it is. I felt that e-commerce is something that will be up and coming. So I just went for the interviews and I got an offer. So in fact, Lazada was the only job that I applied for. I got it. And look at where we are now. It's been more than 2 years. I'm still here. And if anything, definitely no regrets at all, for sure.
People talk about like you join startups, and if the startup is not famous or it's not like a TikTok, if it's not known, it doesn't add any value to your CV. But what's your take on this? For example, in this interview with Lazada, do you have to explain? Do you feel that you have to defend why you joined this startup? Did you feel that they puts you in a different difficult situation that you have to explain away?
Right. Okay. So based on my experience so far, I would say it's been largely positive. I think if anything, when I dived into the whole startup situation, right, I personally felt that it would be something that would be a strong value add. And I think given the situation, the employment situation today, right, I think a lot of employers truly do value people with startup experiences, even more so now today, right? Because I think especially through COVID-19, right, we've seen a lot of startups pop up in the digital space, especially for commerce, right? So I think it was something that I took a gamble on. I felt that having that startup experience, that broad base of experience, the diversity of experiences that you get from a startup will be truly valuable. And at least from what I garnered through the interview, it was something that put me in good stead, because it does, you're faced with like difficult decisions that you have to make, the softer skills that you have to develop when you're as part of a startup. I think these are things that established employers would value for sure, and especially if they're looking to change themselves internally. I think one phenomenon that probably a lot of companies are experiencing today is the need for change, internal change, or even intrapreneurship for that matter. And especially more so given the COVID-19 situation. Let's talk about the context of retail. Brick and mortar, had to be shuttered during the circuit breaker in Singapore or even overseas for that matter. A lot of them had to take to doing online commerce for the first time. And I think throughout this experience, a lot of businesses will have probably learned the need to be nimble, and correspondingly that informs their hiring decisions, right? They will probably want to bring in people, fresh blood, that have that daring do and that ability to think very quickly on their feet, and make the right decisions and maybe not make the right decisions, but make a decision that is informed at that point in time, given whatever information you have, and hopefully things will stick. So I think the point for me describing all that is that the startup skill set as a whole is something that I think is very valuable in today's hiring context, because you are put in situations where you simply would never experience if you're working in a typical established corporation, right? Like I said, you work within a certain silo, these are your deliverables, that's it. Whereas on the other hand, if you're in a startup, if you don't do your work, it clearly shows in that, you guys are simply not bringing in money, and, 1 week later, your company may fold. Juxtapose that to you working in an established organization. Sure, I may slack off a little bit, not do my work properly, but life goes on, right? The cogs in the machine still continues turning. So I think it's a very different mindset, and I think employers of today would value that mindset because it adds that so-called flair that potentially will allow established organizations to reinvent themselves for the future.
I relate to what you said. I agree to what you said. I think a lot depends on the context as well, in terms of who's the employer looking to hire for what kind of role. And I would think you might agree with me that Lazada back in 2019 and even now, in my opinion, is still a bit of a not the mainstream kind of big company that I think we are familiar with. So I think that probably also influenced the way they hire. But maybe that it's very specific, and not all companies may think this way. There's this thing about like signaling effect, right? If you're hired by a big firm, like an MNC, a bank, or a Google, or your Netflix, or Facebook, there's a signaling effect that, we put this name in your CV. It shows that you were hired by these top tech companies. It means that you have passed certain standards. If they want you, means there's something good in you, and therefore there's a lot of value in what you do. So I think that's the other side of the argument that I've also heard about. But for sure, I agree with you that the kind of experiences that we have had in startups is tremendous, and the kind of stress, I think, is different compared to an MNC. It is different, and it's very much needed, I feel, in the fast-changing world that we're in. There's a lot of, it's quite VUCA, right? It's volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. So I totally relate to you, and for sure I've got guests who came on this show and told me the opposite different things. And I think another factor that affects this is also like the stage of your career you're at. If you're early stage career, then the employer might feel that, okay, there's still worth a chance, or there's still time for you to groom you and to grow you, versus if you're a later stage. I think that's one potential perspective. I mean, I'm happy to hear comments or views that may offer a different perspective. I want to talk about your side project. As I told you in the beginning, or even before I got this call, I thought what you're doing is quite inspiring. And don't think of it as a superhero kind of inspiring, that is a Marvel kind of story. But it's more about like someone with a day job making the best of his life and trying out things that he always wanted to try, and ended up telling me he should start this earlier. So that intrigued me, right? And I think that's goal. That's to me, that's a lot of value in that. Yeah, I mean, just for the audience, maybe Aaron, could you tell us a bit more about like this YouTube channel? Tell us more about it. What is it called? If you want to still keep it in stealth mode, you don't have to mention it. Tell us what do you exactly do and how you got about doing this.
Right. So I think before I go on, I do need to set some context as well. And I think harking back to the introduction that I did, one of the interests that I have is with regards to technology as a whole, right? Specifically PC hardware and software. So from a very young age, I've always been dabbling in the world of PC components. And in fact, fun fact, I think when I was like primary 3, that would make me to be about 10 years old or so, I decided that, 9 years old, right, yeah. Right. So I decided that, okay, my parents were not at home. I'm just going to take apart my dad's computer and put it back together and let's see whether it still worked. And it did. But yeah, I've always had the fascination with like, doing things hands-on, right? So the computer was just a very intriguing instrument to me back then as a primary school kid. In fact, my parents, because like I said, they're entrepreneurs, right? They started using PCs, I think from when I was born. I remember we always had a PC back at home, like, those very big old clunky boxes that used to run MS-DOS.
Yep.
So I grew up around computers, and I think I've always had a fascination with this big thing that had lights on it. And I just wanted to learn a lot more about it. So I think it got to the point where, I'll drop by, places like MPH, right, to go and read up a little bit more about computers, just because I'm very interested to understand how does this thing actually work. And I found myself to be very interested in the world of PC hardware and components. So it's just something that, growing up, a lot of my friends know me as the IT guy. And in fact, it got to the point where like in secondary school, my friends would approach me for like advice. Okay, I want to play this game. Do you think my computer is up to scratch? Is it able to handle the graphics at a certain resolution? And I would be able to offer them advice. Okay, you want to play Skyrim, right? Now your current computer hardware, not going to make it. You need to upgrade this, you need to upgrade that. So it's all great fun. And I think I built up a reputation for myself amongst all my friends in secondary school and JC as the computer guy. So whenever they had any IT issues, they approached me. I've built so many computers for my friends over the past few years. In fact, I still do till today, just because I enjoy the process of doing so. So that's some context. Coming back to the YouTube thing. So I do have a YouTube channel at this point in time where I try to, and again, the keyword here is try, because it's really just a fledgling thing that's been ongoing for some time. I try to do reviews of computer hardware components, and in doing so, I unbox them, I give some of my personal opinions on them, and of course, I run through exactly what are the specs of each of these components and what's their performance going to be like. So that being said, the reason why I started up this YouTube channel is because, I've been working for about 5.5 years now, and I've always had this interest. One day, it just got me thinking, all my friends think of me as the IT guy, right? And I think it's also part and parcel of like looking for so-called meaning in life, right? Or something that, you're interested to do that really keeps you awake at night and keeps you engaged. And I figured that, computer hardware and this interest of mine, this passion of mine is something that I should probably leverage, right? And try to make something interesting out of. And, I think we live in the creators economy today. There's a lot of content creators out there, creating review videos on YouTube and that sort of thing. And it got me thinking, why don't I just try putting together, leveraging my expertise and my knowledge in computer hardware and, taking a stab at this whole YouTube thing. And I think it's probably also inspired from a conversation that I had with a secondary school friend of mine who's also an IT geek. So he told me that, hey, do you know that this guy, he has a YouTube channel? I think at that point in time was probably like 500,000 subscribers. He has 13 million subscribers today, by the way. It got me thinking, yeah, this guy, I always watch his videos because he gives a lot of good reviews on computer components. So that got me thinking, why don't I do something like that as well? But that conversation actually happened many years back. In fact, I would say probably 3 or 4 years before I actually got around to starting the YouTube channel. And I think one of the key things that I want to highlight is that something that, if I had a regret, I probably would say that I should have started my YouTube channel earlier, right? I think this is something that, I've for whatever reason, I just felt a bit of an inertia. I thought that, it's just something that probably wouldn't be very interesting. People might not like the videos. I'll get 0 views and that sort of thing. But nonetheless, I took the plunge. It's something that I've always wanted to do. The circumstances were right for me to try something different. So try something different I did. At that point in time, it just so happened I wanted to build a new PC for myself. So I did a quick review, a quick search on Google, right, for this certain component that I was about to purchase. And I realized, okay, no one's actually reviewed this component at all at that point in time. So I thought, first mover advantage, let me just take a shot at this. Bought the components, borrowed my side table, plonked it right in front of me, took my handphone camera, and just started filming off the bat. I prepared a script, naturally, right? Uploaded it, and I was very surprised. I mean, from 0 subscribers, actually I can't remember how many subscribers I got for that video, but it was an outcome that was totally unexpected. In fact, I think that video has probably 20,000 to 30,000 views today. Not much by any stretch of the imagination, but for someone who, doesn't really have a social media following in the first place, I thought that was something very interesting, and it got me interested. I mean, people are actually watching these videos, even though you are a nobody, right? But as long as your content is there, it's something that people are looking for, you might actually gain some traction from it. And if anything, you should be doing something really out of the sake of passion. For myself, it's quite clear-cut. So long story short, that was 2019 when I released my first video. It's 2021 now. I think I have close to 20 videos on my YouTube channel at this point in time. I've just been releasing it very, very slowly as when I have time, because obviously I have a full-time job. What I enjoy from this process is that it's the community effect, right? Random strangers from around the world are actually posting on your YouTube videos, asking you for advice. I'm like, okay, you've recommended this component. How about this other thing? And people are actually happy to share and chat openly on YouTube. And it's amazing, right? Because at the end of the day, I'm a nobody, right? I'm not like a social media influencer or anything, but the content that I put up was, sufficiently interesting enough for these people to want to comment and have a discussion on whether is it the best performing for this class of component, and so on and so forth. So I think, long story short, it's just something that I'll be doing on the side whenever I have time. I mean, I have no idea whether it'll be something that I can monetize anytime soon, because just for some context, YouTube does require you to hit a certain amount of subscribers and view hours before you're able to monetize your channel. But I mean, considering that I just started this for fun, and I mean, looking at my metrics now, it's not half as bad. I haven't monetized it yet, but it's something that I truly enjoy doing. I think the key message I have here really is just do it, right? It's all about small little steps, right? Devoting 2 minutes or even 10 minutes of your life to just do something. So in this context, I'm going to start a YouTube channel. Okay, what can you do in 10 minutes? Register your YouTube account, come up with a logo, and voila, that is the first step. And that creates sort of the momentum for you to carry on doing it. So for myself, I was a little bit skeptical, right? When I created the logo, I was like, okay, fine, I've uploaded it. But then the more I look at it, it's okay, I've already done this. Why don't I just spend another 10 minutes, 15 minutes the next day, right, to see where I can push this forward to, and look at where I am right now. I mean, I have a YouTube channel. It's not all that big, but it is something, right? There's content there. So
For context, we started this in 2019, and the very first video now has garnered about 20,000 plus views. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so just for context, it took about 2 years, right, for you to get 20 plus thousand views, and you didn't do anything at all. It was purely organic.
Absolutely nothing at all.
Yeah, I made you say this because I want to give this insight, right, to people who are listening in, that this is the result of someone who always had this childhood dream or passion, or this obsession about computer. I mean, you being a computer guy, and just exploring what's out there. And you don't need to be famous. You don't need to make millions of doing this. But you just get this intrinsic joy of showing and sharing your joy about computer parts, or about your passion to the rest of the world. And then you started this sort of unintended community, right? People asking you about things, and you're happy to engage.
Yeah.
And it seems like, this is the power of the internet, number one. Number two, with the internet, the world is a smaller place now.
For sure.
Right?
For sure.
And I didn't mean to take away from your passionate talk about what you like in your YouTube channel. And I just want to add some context here is that I reached out to you before when I was considering very seriously about starting a podcast. And when I asked you this question, what's one thing that you do differently? And you said that you wish you had started earlier. And that rang in my head for a long time. It still does. And that was one of the kickers for me to get me into action and to make some real serious action, to start something for real. And I thank you for that, and that's why I want to make it a point for you to share this story, because what you said that has done to me, I believe you can also do the same for the rest who are listening in, and maybe more, So you could be unlocking and unearthing a lot of hidden passions into putting their passions into action. So yeah, that's why I insisted to talk to you about your YouTube channel. 2 years plus, I know you're doing it on the side. I'll ask you again, right? What do you think you would do differently besides starting it earlier?
Okay, I think probably it might also be a good time for me to add a little bit more context on this YouTube channel as well. I majored in communications from SMU. There was a point in time where I actually enrolled into NTU's Wee Kim Wee School of Communications. I actually wanted to do a degree in mass comms, but I decided to go over to SMU in the end because I felt it would be a more measured decision, in that it would probably open a lot more doors for me if I decided not to do anything related to journalism, to PR and that kind of thing. Because a bachelor's degree in business is a lot more generalist and would potentially, allow you to get an easier route into, say, banking, finance, or whatever it is that one might be looking out for. So the reason for me bringing this up is that because I've always been interested in the field of communications. I think in the parallel universe, I might have very well been a news reader or a journalist for that matter. But I think for various reasons, I chose not to go down that route. But at the back of my head, I've always wanted to do something related to that. And I think fueling this passion, this interest for me to want to start a YouTube channel, it's also this interest in public speaking and utilizing what I feel is something that I'm interested in and can do slightly better at, right? And that is to engage with an audience. So it's probably one of the things that I also decided that it will allow me to, scratch this itch, so to speak, to host a channel and talk to people digitally. And that's also one of the reasons why it got me into this whole YouTube thing as a side kind of hustle. So I think the point I'm trying to make here is that the other point that I'd like to add on, apart from, castigating yourself for not having started something earlier, is that if you have a certain interest, by all means, go for it. I think one thing that I'd like to highlight is that during my junior college days, I studied science, right? So biology, chemistry, mathematics, economics. I had absolutely no interest in it. And that probably explains the reason why I didn't do all that well for my A-levels. But come university, right, I majored in communications. I did well. I mean, that's the reason, like you mentioned, right? I mean, I did pretty okay for my grades in university. And I think the point here is about your interests. I'm pretty sure at the end of the day, every one of us has our interest in one way or another. I think it would be sad for us to not try to find a way to weave that interest into your daily life. And I think, my career trajectory has been such. I've dabbled in a lot of things except for communications and marketing. I mean, once in a while, maybe during the startup, right? But I think the point I'm trying to make here is that if you have that opportunity to dive into your passions, seize it. So I think for myself, I saw this YouTube channel as a way for me to, tap on my interests in many facets, right? On one hand, allowing me to explore the field of computer technology and hardware. And on the other hand as well, exploring my interest to do something that's a little bit more communications related. So speaking, talking, engaging with an audience and that sort of thing. So I think, that's probably my takeaway from it, right? Like if you have a passion, go all out for it. I mean, of course, unfortunately, we live in times where people might say that, okay, if you're interested in this thing, but it doesn't earn you money, right? What's the point, right? It's very practical. So I think, for myself, I'm also being practical, right? I mean, that's the reason why I have a full-time job and I'm doing all this on the sideline. I think at the end of the day, we all have to realize that not all of us are going to be billionaires and change makers in a very big way like Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, and the like, right? There's going to be a whole lot of people who are right smack in the middle, ordinary. I think that's just something that we have to live with, right? I mean, if you turn out to be extraordinary, good on you, great for you, right? But at the end of the day, all of us are going to be right smack in the center, right? And I think it's also probably because of the way the media is like. People tend to just focus a lot more on the extreme success stories and as well as the extreme failures as well. But how about the people right in between? So I think the message I have here is that, we're probably just going to be very ordinary people, you and I, just specks on this little planet. So make the best of your finite time that you have on this earth. If you have an interest, try to find a way to tap on it, do something out of it, while at the same time, of course, doing something that hopefully feeds your families and, of course, puts food on the table. So that's probably my key takeaway as well. A bit rambling, right? But I mean, that's probably what I like to share.
What's one, and final question, what's one book, movie, YouTube video, documentary, or podcast that you found yourself recommending it to others recently, and why?
Okay, so I think probably, like I was sharing with you, John, the latest book that I read was probably the Subtle Art of Not Giving a... Right, so that's probably a book that I would recommend because, again, expanding on some of the points that I mentioned earlier on, I think the media as it is today, we tend to highlight only the extreme ends of any spectrum, right? And it creates, to a certain extent, aspirations that might be a bit difficult or nearly impossible to achieve. And that might actually put a lot of undue stress on people to actually try to achieve all these so-called expectations of what one's life should be. But let's face it, not everybody's going to be like that, right? So it's about coming to terms with who you are, finding things that, matter to you, and working towards achieving the things that really matter to you. I think to summarize the book, right, it's really about finding the things that are worth suffering for, so that at the end of the day, you derive that pleasure and happiness from the process of actually trying to achieve your goals. That's probably the book that I would like to recommend, because I think in today's world, a lot of us are all trying to aspire towards that, first $1 million, that bigger paycheck, that bigger job title. But, at the end of the day, we have to recognize that not everybody is going to be at the pinnacle of their success all the time, right? So it's about contentment, about knowing that life is as such, and you just try to make the best of it.
I think that's a beautiful way to end this conversation. I can't thank you enough for your time. Thank you very much, Aaron.
Thank you very much, John. It's been a pleasure.